Welcome back. Next, we're going to work on the joke component, which will be stateless and will just make things look nice. And we'll have a couple of arrows up and down. You click on them and it will call a method passed down from the parent joke list. So I'm going to begin by going to jokelist.js. And before we even start on the joke component, we need to update what we're saving into the state. Right now, we are setting jokes to be this array of jokes, and each joke in there is simply a string. Instead, we're going to make each joke an object so that we can add things in like the votes and then a ID eventually so that we don't get that key issue. So I'm going to update this to push in an object where we have joke, maybe we should call it, joke is fine, res.data.joke, and then we'll set votes to be 0. And now we're going to get an error over here because we're trying to render each joke, but it's an object and React doesn't like that if you're rendering objects, it freaks out. So we'd need to do j.joke, and then let's do dash j.votes, just to make sure it's working. There we go. Everything has 0 votes. Here's the text of the joke and the votes. So next up, let's make the joke component. So I'm going to do that now, joke.js. All right, so inside of our render, we're going to first give it a class name of joke, just to be standard here, capital J, name of the component. And then inside of it, we've got a couple things to display. We want to display the buttons as well as the votes, the text of the joke, and then eventually, if you care, I'll show you how to do these emoji that change. But for now, we'll do a div for the buttons, like the up and down, which I'll call joke buttons. And then I'm going to go and add in font awesome so we can get those icons in here. So in my index.html, I'm just going to paste in, I copied it from an earlier project we did. It gives us font awesome. And now we can make our icons. So the first one is going to be an icon with class name of FAS, FA-arrow up. And then the second one is just arrow down. And then in between, let's make a span that has this.props.votes, which right now we're not passing in, so we're not going to see anything, but we'll make sure to pass in votes. And then after the joke buttons div, let's make another div with a class name of joke-text, and this is where the joke itself will go. So inside of that, we'll just do this.props.joke or .text. Text is probably better. Okay, so we have that done. Now we're going to go to our joke list and start working with the joke component. So I am going to need to import it. So import joke from /joke. Nope, not JS. I don't need to do that. And then down here, we're going to map them instead of to divs. We're going to map to a joke component, and we're going to pass in votes as j.votes. And then we're also going to pass in the text. Right now the key is called joke. I like to be consistent, so I'm going to call it text here. So this whole thing represents a single joke. The text of the joke is here, and the votes for the joke are there. Okay, so text equals j.text. Let's see if we're getting any errors. Nope, it looks like it's working. We're getting our arrows. They don't do anything, but we're getting the joke and the arrows displayed, at least on the page. So let's now work on the buttons. So the way this will work is that our joke component is still going to be completely stateless. It's just going to call on these icons an event handler that is passed down from the parent. So we're going to define a method up here. Instead of doing an upvote and downvote as two separate methods, let's just make one called handle vote. And let's do it after, there we go. Handle vote will take a number. So it's going to take an ID of a vote, which we haven't added IDs yet, so we have to do that. And then we can call it delta maybe, or change. Let's call it delta. So that could be a negative number or it could be a positive number. All right, so I'm going to just leave it as is because we need to add IDs in, because handle vote needs to have an ID in order to figure out which part of the state to update. Which one are we updating, which one are we adding to or deleting or removing from, upvoting and downvoting. So for IDs, there's not really a great piece of data that we already have that we can use. We don't get an ID back from the API. So I'm going to import UUID, which I've already installed earlier, from uuid/v4. So it's just npm install uuid. And if you didn't watch the videos where I went over this, it might be helpful to just go back, but it's super straightforward. We just call uuid as a function. So right here, when we're creating our new object that we're pushing into state, we're going to set ID to be uuid, and that will give us a new unique ID. Now, if we inspect, we should see in the state, if we take a look at the joke list, jokes, they should now each have an ID in there, and they do. Let's also make sure to pass that in as a key. So we're going to do that here, key equals joke or j.id. Now we can finally work on the handle vote method, which will take an ID. It will find the correct joke in the state and then update it by adding in the delta to the votes. And delta could be negative, but we're just going to add that negative number. All right, so we're going to need to do a this.setState, and I'm going to do the callback form. So I'll call the old state just st, and we're going to update jokes and set it to the old state.jokes.map. This is just one way of doing it, but I'm going to map over because we do want to make a new array. And for each joke, we are going to check, is that joke ID equal to the ID that was passed in? If it is, we're going to return the existing joke, but set the votes to be j.votes plus delta. And then we need to have the else, we'll just return j, the unchanged joke. So we're going to map over the old jokes, the existing ones really, they're not old just yet. So the existing jokes in the state, we're going to check each one, is that ID equal to the ID we're looking for? If it is, we make a new object containing the old joke information, but we update the votes. Otherwise, if it's not the correct one we're looking for, we just add the existing joke into the array. Okay, so that should set the state. Now we need to make the buttons work. So we need to pass down this method handle vote right here to our joke. So I'm going to make one called upvote, a prop, and I'm going to use an arrow function for now at least. This dot handle vote, and if it's an upvote, we need to pass in the joke ID, and we're going to pass in 1 as a second argument. So we'd be upvoting, and then I'll duplicate it, but change it to downvote, which is going to be -1. So now we have these two methods that we have access to inside of the props in the joke. So inside of joke, we're now just going to call them based off of these buttons. So on click, when you click the upvote here, we're going to call this .props.upvote. And then in the arrow down, we're going to do an on click equals this .props.downvote. And we don't need to be executing it. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so we should get some buttons here. Let me just zoom way in. Let's upvote the first one. It appears to work. There's no local storage involved. Upvote and downvote are working. There's not going to be any reordering as well. So if I downvote this one, it's not going to go to the bottom, but this is good enough for now. We've got those buttons working, and that's it for the joke component. Well, for now. Next, we'll work on styling the individual jokes, and I will warn you, there's going to be a little bit of React stuff because if you look at the original, there's some selective styling that we can add in, some colors that we map based off of the number of votes. So 15 or higher had this green color, negative goes into red, and then there's a range of colors here. So that does involve a little bit of React, but it's just decorative stuff. It's not functional to how the app works, so you can skip the next video if you don't care about it, but we're gonna make a single joke look good, and we'll add in the emoji as well.